New Zealand Tech Podcast, the voice of the tech community. Proudly supported by Umbrella Connect.
Hey folks, greetings and welcome along to the New Zealand Tech Podcast. We are at episode 499. I'm your host, Paul Spain, and with me today, David Ings. How are you, David?
Yeah, good, thanks.
Good. Now, maybe you can fill listeners in where you fit into this big wide world of tech here in New Zealand.
Yeah, sure. So background is building cloud technology companies, and this time round in this venture really looked at where the future of robotics, and by robots I mean the ones you're thinking about. They've got arms, they've got legs, they've got rotors, and how people would be managing robotics, autonomous robotics in the future. So myself and a co-founder, Richard, have actually built a platform that coordinates and monitors autonomous robots.
That's very cool. Well, really looking forward to diving in and talking robots during this episode. First up, though, let's run through sort of some of the tech news of the week. Garmin hit with a big ransomware attack, so we're told. How's that impacted you? You're a Garmin user?
Yeah, I'm one of those aspirational Garmin users that didn't notice because I didn't go for a run this weekend.
Yeah.
But yeah, when we spoke about it, checked my app, and sure enough, it's still down.
Yeah. It's quite a big deal when an organisation is hit with ransomware in a lot of cases. But I think what is different about this one is that a lot of the general public are impacted. So, often when I'm having discussions with people about cybersecurity, about ransomware, there seems to be a disconnect in terms of that a lot of people just don't think it's too important. And I often use this analogy of comparing our catering to sort of cybersecurity appropriately within our organisations in the same way that we do with backups.
Yeah.
And if you look back, for those of us that are old enough at least, if you look back, say 20 years, 20 years ago, people didn't necessarily back everything up. And over time, we got used to this reality with computers that sometimes you lose data. And so it got to a point where, it was just one of those things you have to be at a point where all your data is backed up once, twice, however many times, however many mechanisms. Obviously, we've got cloud-based backups and so on now, and so everyone just takes it for granted that you must have your data, backed up if there's any shred of importance to it. But when it comes to thinking about cybersecurity, often that doesn't get the same level of it's certainly not as easily understood as backups, right? I mean, that's a very much closer to a black and white type thing. Although of course it's never quite as simple as that, and so many organisations have had issues where they've gone to try and restore something from backup at some point, and we weren't monitoring that right, or something happened. But those things have got more robust in recent years. But there's still that sort of level, I think, where most people haven't been heavily impacted by for instance a ransomware attack for it to actually be something that's really on their radar and is important to them, for them to consider. But I think maybe this one is maybe the first of, hopefully there aren't many, but realistically, I think that there's such a financial incentive for cyber criminals to be involved in cybercrime, whether it's ransomware or other things, that this probably won't be the last cybercrime that impacts a largish segment of the population, right?
No, not at all. And again, this is quite a different attack to what happened to Twitter recently as well, which is more related to the insiders. And we might even talk about that later around robotic security. But for us, it was the first feature we built was a cybersecurity model rather than last, and we think that's going to be a very big issue for the robotics industry going forward.
Yeah. I mean, the Twitter one, and we ended up not having space to delve into it last week because it probably would have taken up the whole agenda. But I mean, that I guess is something that reveals the other side of cybersecurity, which is the the human element, right? And that's always part of it. And I'm sure that many of the folks at Twitter will be licking their wounds, a little bit after seeing, so many of their most important accounts have been, having been compromised for a period of time. A whole bunch of people out of pocket with the Bitcoin scams that were going on. Although one thing I noticed yesterday, I was sitting in the car. I just come back from a meeting, and there was a bit of content that I wanted to see, so I flicked on YouTube in the car. I was I'll just have a look, here. And in the Tesla, I don't have the YouTube account sort of signed in as such, as far as I'm aware. So it was just quite generic, but it popped up with a video that was live streaming to do with Bitcoin.
Wow. And
basically a Bitcoin scam that was like, hey, for each, you send anything from 0.1 Bitcoin to whatever, and we'll send you back twice as much. Now, in the top left-hand corner of the video was who was it? Oh, it was the Winklevoss twins, who were involved in Facebook and with Mark Zuckerberg and so on in the early days. I think they ended up getting quite a big payout from Facebook, but and that they've had heavy involvement with Bitcoin and crypto, and so there was this legitimate video on the screen, but it was basically surrounded by a whole lot of dodgy stuff, and it said there were huge numbers of people watching this stream, which is undoubted, and maybe a whole lot of them were bots, but undoubtedly that would have been the reason why the YouTube algorithm would have pushed that to the top, and you had this sort of moving bar showing how much money people had put in, and we're giving away whatever it was, it was like, we're giving away 5,000 Bitcoins or something.
Unreal.
And then it was just like, massive scam alert. But that was, this reality. So, there are just so many different ways that we're going to continue seeing, I think, cybercrimes taking place, right?
Yeah, no, absolutely.
Yeah. Oh, well, it's very, I think, very astute that, you would see that with Rocos as being, one of those foundational focuses for you to really, get started with.
Yeah, and I think in our industry, we, my co-founder Richard worked in the banking industry in London, and we talk about the fact that the cybersecurity has to be more secure than banking, because in banking, the worst case scenario, somebody loses their money, whereas with robotics, you have these 2-ton devices on the end of the API, and people get hurt. So the cybersecurity model is more important than ever.
Yeah, really, really important. Yeah, just having a look at Garmin's sort of status page at the moment, and it's not red everywhere as it was the other day, but it's orange and green, and Garmin Golf is online, Live Track is online, Garmin Dive is online, but lots of other things in sort of partial states. So I don't know whether pilots have got their capabilities back yet, and so on. Just looking at this, it's very much a work in progress. So I hope it pans out well for them, but I also hope it becomes a bit of a shake up for others. And let's just see how it plays out, and hopefully they'll reveal some more details around what happened. Did they pay out the ransom and so on? Often this information gets revealed through maybe non-official channels, which is how it came out that they'd been hit by ransomware, and people were sending screenshots and other things and releasing them, which probably internally they wouldn't have felt so good about. But I noticed their share price has already bounced back to what it was. So I don't know. People have don't give too much importance to these things, but I'm certainly heard a few conversations around people saying, is it time to ditch the Garmin, jump to an Apple Watch, something else, even just in the short, what was it? I mean, less than 5 days that they were down.
Sure.
Yeah. I see Slack are accusing Microsoft of illegally crushing competition. We were chatting earlier. You use Slack in-house, I believe.
Yes, we do.
Yeah, it's interesting to see Microsoft getting, I guess this attention from a perspective of antitrust type, anti-competitive type complaints. That's something that sort of plagued them 20 or,
I
or
was
20,
about to say,
25,
it seems like
25 years ago. And they've worked pretty hard to avoid it. Well, maybe because Microsoft have been mostly in a position where they just didn't have the level of dominance that they had in the 90s, right? But I'm sure they've also been quite mindful, because it really tied up their business for quite a period of years in terms of litigation and so on. And interesting that this complaint has been filed in Europe, where the regulations there are probably somewhat stronger than what they are in the US in terms of these matters. And so even though I think Slack's a US company, as is of course Microsoft, so an interesting take, and centers on the fact that effectively Microsoft are building out a broad productivity suite, and one of the tools it just happens to compete with Slack, although for many years Slack have been saying Microsoft don't compete with us, etc., etc. I think they must be finally sort of seeing that it's very, very hard for them to make new sales when businesses subscribe to Microsoft Suite, because when it comes down to signing the checks, as it were, I guess it's digital these days, but approving that expenditure when you've got a tool that does very much the same thing, and it's I guess effectively free when it's part of a bundled offering. I would imagine that you can buy Microsoft Teams separately. I'm pretty sure you can with all of their offerings. There is sort of separate pricing, but when you buy that Teams offering or the Microsoft offering, that comes part and parcel. So it's interesting. I think they're pushing here that Microsoft should break break Teams out, so that it's an individual cost for an organisation to pay, rather than a bundled offering, which
I think
interesting.
This technology evolves, and it's so heavily integrated. I saw this week my Google mobile app, my Gmail app, suddenly popped up with a whole bunch of new Meet features.
Yes.
And so Google's obviously also looking at where they play in the chat space and the video conference space, and they're heavily integrating their suite. So it's going to be interesting to see how it plays out.
Yeah, it seems as though Google are really stepping up their game on that front, and they maybe haven't been taken quite so seriously, certainly in the broader media discussions, which give you a little bit of insight in terms of what people are commonly using. As far as the video side, it was all Zoom, but a bit of Microsoft Teams sort of coming into even those mainstream media discussions. Slack, maybe not so much. That's more on the chat type communication side. But it does seem Microsoft are gaining traction. But Google have a huge user base, and if they can nail it and get their offerings right in this space, you would tend to imagine that they're going to gain a fair bit of traction, and that will also make life harder for Zoom and for Slack, right?
Yeah, and Zoom always had a dominance because our network connections were not that great, and Zoom had a technical advantage over other people that their video connection was just better than everyone else's. And now as our pipelines get bigger and bigger, it doesn't make as much of a difference, so they're actually losing some of that advantage.
Yeah. Oh, well, we'll see over time. I had one of my team today was chatting to, I think, somebody within the world of technology distribution recently, And it was around these new, meeting room type systems that are starting to become quite prevalent. You walk into a meeting room and it's just totally geared up with a dedicated Zoom room system or Teams room system. And the comment there was, in this case, that it seems as though something like 75 to 80% of these room systems and this particular company was finding that people were, in terms of what they were choosing, because we look at the vendors and they're often doing the same hardware but available to run Microsoft Teams or to run the Zoom room system, but 75 to 80% opting for the Teams offering, which
Interesting.
I was actually quite surprised to hear, but I guess that's the level of traction that we're seeing in the local market. May well be quite different in other markets, but certainly Microsoft seem to have picked up their game. I think in the past sometimes they would get beaten and would never be able to get back in the game, but
we see a stark difference between the size of organisation. Medium-sized organisations might go for Teams, and the really large corporates will be on WebEx or something like that.
Yeah. And WebEx isn't the most smooth experience often, but none of these tools are perfect, are they? And it is very dependent on connectivity and varying other things, right?
Yeah.
Now on to Apple. It was interesting seeing news that Apple are beginning to assemble iPhone 11 in India, and we've talked about the different sort of geopolitical realities that are going on and impacting things. India is in this position where they've got that scale of China, and so they're able to control things more than most other countries. I think we've maybe seen similar moves to what India are doing, and I guess their approach is basically saying either you make your smartphones here in India, or you pay quite a big import tax to bring your product in from other markets. And Brazil have taken a somewhat similar approach in some areas. I'm not sure specifically whether smartphones is within that realm, but I know Brazil, and again they've got a really big scale, not quite the same scale as India, but they're able to dictate a little bit, and that's why we see probably a higher level of manufacturing maybe in Brazil than there would be otherwise, because they're really trying to encourage that happening locally. So seeing that Foxconn, who are Apple's manufacturing partner, basically starting to assemble iPhones there is an interesting move, and I think part of a trend that we are seeing, which is a lowering of reliance on China to do all manufacturing for everybody. It wasn't that long ago. It was pretty much guaranteed. Anything that was being manufactured, it seemed to be in China.
Yeah.
And if we look back, I don't know where you draw the timelines exactly, but certainly, when I was growing up, so much technology and I don't know, plastic and those sorts of goods was coming out of Taiwan, right? And now, Taiwan, it's too expensive to get things made there, so it's moved to China. But now we're starting to see it maybe fragment up a little bit more, which has probably got some some reasonably positive flow on. So I think that the world doesn't have all its eggs in one basket from a manufacturing perspective.
Yeah, and you wonder what the background for India is, if it's related to the China conflict at the moment, if that's a factor, just like with them banning 40-odd apps with Chinese backing, or if this is just the nature of protecting their industry and forcing production to come through.
Yeah. And I know just that there has been some assembly of some of the lower end iPhones in the past in India, and it does seem to be that it's assembly. It's still China is a very, very important part of the supply chain, so it's not as though that's completely changing, and I don't think probably could change for that these sorts of things take a long time to change, don't they? Yeah. Now, onto looking at things locally, I saw news through from Dawn Aerospace. Now, you've chatted to the Dawn Aerospace folks, right? We haven't had them on the show yet. We probably
should.
Probably need to. But they're doing some amazing work both in New Zealand and in the Netherlands. They're sort of operating between, I think that the two locations. But headquartered out of Christchurch, and they've unveiled a suborbital spaceplane today called their Mark II Aurora, and they're saying this is ahead of an intensive 12-month flight test campaign, which looks pretty exciting, and it's a forerunner to their Mark III, which is I think going to be their really serious offering to really commercialise what they're doing, but this plane, the Mark II, is going to be capable of flights. They're saying to above 100 kilometre altitude, which is very much the border of space, which is very, very cool. Now, they're I guess the thing about their planes is they're more, I guess, drones than traditional planes, aren't they? I mean, they look like a sort of a variation, between a traditional sort of, I guess, military drone that we've seen in the past. Not a manned drone, and I guess you could say a space shuttle, in that they are able to get up very, very high, and I think in the future the aim with the certainly with the Mark III will be around delivering satellites up into orbit, and they're talking sort of 50 to 100 kilogram satellites. So
which is still pretty decent.
That's pretty cool. Yeah, I mean that puts them on something of a collision course with Rocket Lab. So slightly, there's a potential, crossover, and in terms of what they're doing. I'm sure that there'll probably be a difference in which customers would suit each business, but it's certainly very much a sign of the sort of acceleration we're seeing around being able to get satellites up into space at ever decreasing costs.
Yeah.
Very, very cool. The last one I wanted just to touch on locally was this news piece around Sealord being fined, and the headline I read was sort of highlighting the particular fine that they had received, which wasn't a large amount of money. I think it was $24,000, and that was kind of the big part of the headline, but also tucked into the headline was that they forfeited a vessel. And so I delved a little bit deeper into this, and I thought, well, I wonder whether was this a big deal? What's the value of this vessel, and could technology play a part in it? And sure enough, the big part was that this vessel was worth $16 million, and really what had happened for Sealord there was they hadn't stayed within these sort of I guess somewhat sort of virtual boundaries, because it's there's no big painted mark on the ocean telling you where you can and can't go, but pretty amazing that an organisation with an asset like that must have understood the implications of basically fishing within areas that they're not supposed to be, could have some pretty big implications for them.
Yeah, and I guess with technology nowadays, it's pretty unbelievable to think that they didn't know exactly where they were on a map.
Yeah, so looking at this, it was around, the incident was between the 26th and the 28th of October 2018. So we're not talking, a long time ago, and there's talk now. Now we have available the technology that would will sound alarms and alert us if we go outside the area. But I mean, that wouldn't have been, I wouldn't have thought it would have been too hard to have had that technology in place at that point in time. There must have been, I only can imagine some disconnect between those that understood the legal ramifications of fishing in the wrong area and those with the technological nous to understand, look, if it's going to cost us this much, then if you go to your whether it's internal or external sort of technologists and say, hey, we've got this risk, it could cost us a huge amount of money if we go and fish in the wrong areas, is there a solution?
Well, the answer is absolutely yes, but when we've had airplanes go missing in the last 5 years, we still can't believe that you're not tracking $100 million airplane or whatever it is. So, so I think there are realities in those industries in terms of cost, and obviously this has been a pretty costly exercise.
Yeah. But sometimes there's maybe things are just the way they always have been, and things aren't necessarily getting communicated or elevated in terms of importance. Because if this has happened now, presumably it's been a risk for some time, right? Yeah. All right. Well, those are the sort of the news things of the week. I'm keen to really delve in with you a little bit around, what's happening in the robotics world. It was a great privilege to come by your office last week and, meet some of the team and, see a little bit of the work that you're doing, and of course your Boston Dynamics spot. Robots. I think you got a couple of those in New Zealand, so it was great to get hands on, as it were, and see the technology in action. But I thought it'd be good to maybe just sort of hear from you as someone who's been really embedded in this robotics space now for I guess, how long have you been running with Rocos? Couple of years?
2.5, just over 2.5 years. Yeah.
And what were you doing before that really sort of sparked the idea to start up Rocos?
Yeah, well, my co-founder and I have actually worked together on and off for about 20 years, and our area of specialization is really in cloud architecture and building big scalable cloud systems. So cloud infrastructure has matured significantly in the last 10 years, and we were building robots for fun in our garages, as you do in the technology industry. And the first thing as a cloud architect you want to do with your lawnmower robot that you've just made is to be able to connect to it from your phone. And going through the tech stack and learning about robotics, you suddenly realize that the robotics that's been built has been built by mechatronics engineers, AI experts, and they really haven't had to invest a lot of time and money in the ability to connect that robot to any third-party system. And for us, we looked forward and said, look, where is the industry heading with autonomous robotics? You will be seeing robots doing last-mile delivery, little buggies bringing you pizza. There'll be drones doing deliveries. There'll be, survey robots. There'll be agricultural robots. There'll be cleaning robots in airports. There'll be security robots, and it's an inevitability that this is coming. And the question was, we thought it was relatively obvious you'd need a central system to connect those robots, monitor them from a remote location, and be able to control and coordinate them from that central system. And then further out than that is, how do you integrate those robots with existing digital systems? And so at that point, we realized that this was really something that was going to come in the future, and we were quite uniquely placed, understanding robotics plus cloud infrastructure, on actually creating a business out of it, and raise some money and launch the business. Yeah.
How hard was it to raise that money initially? I think when you and I were chatting, you said you had that challenge that you were asked, well, who else is there in this field? And that's something of a validation for venture capitalists as well, does anybody else see this as important?
Yeah.
Or are you dreaming? And I think at that stage maybe you couldn't name any other competitors.
No, not at that stage. There were people nibbling on the edges of that, but not complete match competitors. I think New Zealand's lucky in that early stage investment. We've got a very generous angel ecosystem, and it was Icehouse Ventures that stood up, Robbie Paul from Icehouse Ventures, that put me in front of initially Tuhua, which is one of their funds.
Yes.
And I was just at a barbecue with him, and I said, how early is too early? And he said, well, come and pitch and we'll find out.
Yeah, that's great.
And we joined an accelerator there called Flux at the Icehouse, and basically been growing from there. And I think I say generous because I think in the very early days of a business venture like that, even now we are quite early. So 2.5 years ago, we were even more early than that. And I think if you look at the angel investors in New Zealand, I think there is definitely this aspect of, we'd love to get a return at some point, maybe, hopefully, maybe 10 years, maybe 15.
Yeah.
They're pretty realistic about that. But on the flip side, they're often successful entrepreneurs that have made some money internationally and are giving back to the community. And they're saying, on the one hand, we'd love to make some money. This is part of kind of a hobby that we have. But on the other hand, it's about stimulating the economy, backing young entrepreneurs to create businesses. And so New Zealand's quite lucky from that perspective to do really early stage ventures.
Yeah, that's great. And I think the Boston Dynamics, technology has caught a lot of attention over the last few years with the videos that they've shared online. What was how did it come about that you were able to actually get some of their tech here? Is this a line that they've crossed in terms of starting to make this tech available more broadly? Was it a funding thing? How did that sort of combination come together?
Yeah, so we are working with an international energy company that's doing inspection with Boston Dynamics robots. And in the early days when we were pitching for that work, we actually reached out to Boston Dynamics and actually said, look, we have this platform that connects and monitors robots from a remote location. We're pitching for this work, which is related to your robots. We're quite keen to be part of your ecosystem. And so we had a few calls with them, and this is just pre-COVID lockdown. We actually went out to Europe for the pitch and have actually won that work in Europe around the energy company. But as part of that trip coming home to New Zealand, kind of being chased by COVID from Italy to Spain to the US, we managed to get our training in Boston Dynamics. They accepted us into the early developer program because of the work we were doing with them, and managed to get hold of these two Spot robots as part of that. So at that point you were required to go on training in Boston, so we rerouted the flights, went via Boston, did the training, and then shortly after that, we were basically literally a couple of weeks before lockdown, the Spot robots arrived. So we actually had them during that lockdown period, which was pretty fantastic. And Boston Dynamics, similar to DJI, thinks about the ecosystem in terms of letting third-party developers innovate on top of their platform. They're not trying to solve every problem for their customer. They actually want to say, we have a world-class platform that's the most flexible, cost-effective platform for these tasks, and we want the software and hardware ecosystem to evolve around us. So they're an incredibly supportive partner in that journey, and because our platform, we could within days integrate with their robot. We had their entire engineering team controlling the Spot dog I had with me down in the Bay of Plenty, and they were walking around this avocado orchard from Boston, all locked down in their houses.
Wow.
And that was a pretty exciting experience for them and for us working with them.
Yeah, so they wouldn't have had that type of control normally in the past.
No.
But, through your platform, they were able to tap right in.
Absolutely. Yeah.
Oh, that's really neat. And the video that you shared, I think it had over 1 million views in quite a short space of time.
Yeah.
I guess a big highlight was seeing a Boston Dynamics Spot robot there acting as a sheepdog.
Yeah, that was great.
Fun.
That was great. Yeah, so with Spot, we thought we needed to be testing Spot in as many situations as we could. Construction, inspection, and agri-tech is an obvious one in New Zealand.
Yeah.
being down in the Bay of Plenty just before lockdown, we got to do some shooting on a kiwi fruit orchard, and also wanting to test it out on a sheep and beef station. And luckily enough, my wife's parents have a beautiful farm down in Gisborne where we were able to let Spot loose and chase some sheep around. And I think anyone that comes from a city, just seeing hundreds of sheep being herded by the actual dogs is impressive enough, never mind actually seeing how the robotic dog could behave. And for us, all of those scenarios in robotics is just about experimentation. What is the robot capable of? And to be honest, we had really low expectations. Would it be able to handle the terrain? Would it run out of battery life? What happens when it hits a thistle? How would the dogs behave? All of these types of scenarios. And I think everyone was shocked at how well it actually performed in that environment.
I didn't see it yelping when it stood on a thistle.
Yeah. It did get stuck behind thistles because I wasn't sure if they were solid structures or not, so it was pretty apprehensive to the thistles. But I think there were some really interesting outputs from that. Firstly, domestic dogs really hate Spot. They do not trust Spot at all. They recognize it as something similar to them but different to them and very threatening. Sheepdogs see machines all day, every day, and they didn't even blink once at Spot. And there was really fascinating things like that, putting Spot into that environment, that they were basically just collaborative from day one, and they know how to work around dangerous machines. So it was fantastic to see, and it handled the terrain, absolutely perfectly. And we had a lot of inbound communication happen, people saying to us, can't believe you're going to replace the dogs. And one of them was actually a professor who had actually done her master's in herd logic, and she said to us, I've got an algorithm I built 10 years ago, which was literally to do with this concept of sheepdog agents and sheep agents. Would you like it?
Wow.
So we haven't implemented it yet, but it's amazing that 10 years ago these algorithms were being built for simulated situations like this.
Yeah. Now, when we look at the role of robotics within society, within business and at varying sectors, we're on what seems to be a really long journey. I look back, we've had our dishwashers and washing machines and so on for a very long time. Those ones, of course, just so broadly relevant, and what they do has been very, very sort of structured. It does this, something spins around, a bit of water comes out, and whatnot. Hardly a robot in the sense of something with a whole lot of smarts, but useful all the same. But we've got this journey of getting from where we are now, where there are sort of robots starting to appear, and I guess new areas appearing in hotel delivery robots and things like that. We've got drones and the like, but it does seem as though there's quite a long journey from this point to where we might sort of see what we've seen in science fictions in terms of walking, talking robots that can do virtually any sort of physical task a human can do. But maybe you can walk us through what you see as those sort of next few phases over the next few years, and where you would expect to see your technology getting utilized. For instance, who would be your customers right now? What would people be wanting to use your technology for? Is it their sort of practical uses where they can go out and solve problems today, or is it much more that proof of concept and sort of early testing phase and getting some familiarity with what might happen as the hardware gets more developed?
Yeah, I think so. As you mentioned, there's certain robots, like even take an elevator. It's a robot, and you're quite comfortable to climb inside the robot and allow it to drop you 5 stories and decide when to brake and all of these things. So we've had relationships with robots that didn't necessarily look humanoid or like an animal for a while, but the progression has been quite slow since the elevator was invented. We didn't make much progress for a long period of time around it, and I think the big difference with the robotics now is them being able to operate in unknown environments. An elevator, a washing machine, it operates in a very known environment, and it's got a very specific purpose. So we really classify our software generally useful for mobile robotics. So generally it's got legs, wheels, rotors, propellers, something of that sense. And in order to operate in an unknown environment, it needs sensors, it needs input, it needs vision systems, it needs sonar, it needs LiDAR, it needs all of these kind of inputs. In the last 10 years, there have been massive breakthroughs in machine learning and AI systems that allow these robots much more effectively and much more cost effectively to actually navigate their environments. And that's one of the big breakthroughs, really, that's enabled this. So very cost effectively, with $1,000 worth of hardware, you can have a pretty sophisticated robot that can navigate its environment. And the question then, we talk about PhDs have spent the last 10 years in the lab trying to get this robot to A, not fall on its face, B, navigate an environment and not bump into things. And now we can do those pretty effectively, very safely. And just look at your Tesla, it can navigate pretty safely and on its own, and if not more safely than a human driver. So the question now is, how can you add components to these robots to make them generally useful? And so obviously last mile delivery is a very big category around having rovers and drones actually delivering goods. The total addressable market in that industry is absolutely humongous, but they struggle from the fact that you're trying to put a robot in an environment that's difficult to change. So you have a robot that has to not run over people on the sidewalk, or actually work alongside bicycles and vehicles and cross roads and respond to traffic lights. So those environments come with legal constraints, they come with health and safety concerns. So the bar is exponentially higher to get robots operating in those public environments that are difficult to change for robots. And so what we are seeing is where robots have had in the last year a huge explosion in terms of commercialization and rollout is in much more controlled environments. We talk about agriculture being a really perfect environment to experiment in. People know how to deal with dangerous machines. In a farming environment, if a tractor rides over your foot, it's pretty much your fault, not the tractor's. You were just in the way and you shouldn't have been. Whereas if a robot drives over your foot on the sidewalk, it's definitely the robot's fault. So agriculture has some interesting characteristics, but also some challenges around robots. If there's only a seasonal reason for the robot to exist, what do you do with it the other part of the year? And then just generally indoors. So obviously warehouse robotics has had this, in the last 10 years, looking at Amazon and what they can do with warehouse robotics. It's a known environment, it's a health and safety lockdown environment, it's a flat surface floor, it's a well-mapped environment, and these robots can be incredibly efficient. So moving on from that, things like cleaning robots are starting to have a big uptake in the industry. Known environments, they can operate either with humans around, or you can run them when the humans aren't in the airport or shopping mall or supermarket or something like that. So security robots are becoming more and more popular now, which is effectively just a security camera on wheels. And again, you've got machine learning algorithms that can identify if people should or shouldn't be in certain zones. So security is a fantastic application for robotics, which is taking off. The other big one we're seeing now is in hospitals, and hospitals have a number of use cases where there's a lot of tasks that skilled people are doing that is kind of unskilled labor. So taking linen from a specific room in the hospital and taking it to be washed. So linen delivery robots. The sterile equipments are going from the room that actually sterilizes the equipment to the surgery room is a requirement. Drug delivery robots that'll go to a pharmacy on site and actually get an accurate prescription for a patient and take it to the patient's room. And it's also dramatically improving the quality of the delivery. You're getting far less mistakes being made by the system, and soon you can start tying these automations together. So not only at the pharmacy it's not necessarily a human giving the drug dispensing to the robot. It could be a robot arm taking the drugs out of a dispensing unit, packaging it, giving it to the robot. So very quickly it starts looking like quite a futurist scenario, and you're starting to literally design hospitals with extra lanes and lanes deliberately for robots. They're putting extra Wi-Fi and connectivity infrastructure into hospitals to accommodate these types of scenario. You actually start getting congestion problems, and there's a Changi hospital in Singapore has had to build algorithms to deal with congestion with their robots, because 3 robots need to get through the same corridor, and they have to, find out who's going to go first. So those areas are starting to absolutely take off. And what we're finding is in the verticals where you start getting traction, the acceleration happens far quicker than people think it would. But the areas where they haven't got traction yet, like last mile delivery or autonomous taxis, it takes way longer than people think. But it'll be one of those overnight explosions that when it does take off in those verticals, it'll be a very quick transition because inevitably the numbers have stacked up for that vertical, and the safety issues have been taken care of.
Yeah, when the numbers sort of stack up, it becomes hard to do anything else, right?
Yeah,
it's that thing if you're going to be disrupted if you don't get on board quickly. Yeah. Oh, that's really interesting. And when you look at the sorts of, are those areas that you've mentioned areas that Rocos is involved in right now? Those are the sorts of areas you're getting involved in?
Yeah, absolutely. But I mean, we have other categories like biosecurity with boats. They have autonomous boats that can actually manage marine sanctuaries and actually monitor if anyone's in the marine sanctuary that shouldn't be there. Those boats can live out in the ocean for months at a time using solar and those types of energy sources. And other industries like agriculture, obviously, we do a lot of work in Australia in agriculture and mining in the robotic space. And in the Nordic regions, there's drones monitoring shipyards as well. So there's this massive variety of autonomous robots. And I think one of the early questions when we founded the company was, just like in the drone industry, would you land up with a provider like DJI that owns 80% of the industry? Would you land up with a rover platform that's 80% of the market? And it turns out the answer is no. There's a very wide variety of robots. And I kind of talk about the analogy of mobile apps. In the old BlackBerry days, it's like, how many apps could you possibly use? Email, calendar, maybe a snake game. And then you start running out of options, whereas now there's hundreds of thousands of quality apps in the App Store. And with mobile robots, every week we see robots that we never thought, we didn't even conceive. They're chasing chickens and stopping them laying eggs in certain parts of a barn. They're chasing geese off of private estates in Minneapolis so that the geese don't mess on the lawn. Yeah. There's just this massive variety of robotics, and because the price is coming down so dramatically, you can put them into these incredible scenarios.
Yeah, and I guess that the great thing about doing the software layer, which you're doing, that can scale infinitely, right? And if you're making the robots, and particularly if your software can work with all of them, which is I guess your approach, right, which is to work with as many vendors as possible. Yeah, there's a degree of there being a race to the bottom on pricing, and I'm sure the best robots, most reliable, safest, most well built and so on, are always going to command a premium, and there'll be premium brands as we've I guess seen in other sectors. But if you can have that sort of software piece and get a reasonable chunk of that market, then that's a pretty exciting business, I think, long term.
Yeah, and we talk about advantages and disadvantages of being in New Zealand, and certain countries like China would have a massive advantage in access to hardware expertise and building the robots and manufacturing them at low cost and things like that. So it's obviously possible to build robotics from New Zealand, but it just increases the scale and problems that you face in distribution and those types of challenges. And obviously in software, New Zealand does very well creating enterprise software for the world. And so we love being here and being able to do that. And we don't have logistics problems getting our software out.
Yeah, that's great. And can you speak to, I guess, the geopolitical issues that we have been seeing in terms of do you see companies having concern around buying robotic technology from one market or another, in terms of are they going to have complete control? Is it going to be are these robots going to be spying on them, et cetera, et cetera? Is that a concern, or is it such that the ability of the technology is really able to be entirely managed through your tools, and therefore doesn't really matter? It's not going to make any difference where the robot was sort of manufactured. How does that sort of side of it play out?
Yeah, I think all of those are concerns. I think those concerns are not getting taken as seriously yet, but I think as soon as big Fortune 500 enterprises start adopting robotics more aggressively, the companies will have to be making a lot of those decisions. And we see a bit of that. So, for example, the hotel delivery robot industry out of China, it's already a very mature market. You can half the hotels in Shanghai will have delivery robots. And when they sell into Western hotels in the US, the concern of a robot having a camera and actually being able to film your guests is a massive privacy concern. And it's not even that film being accessible to a specific nation. It's about, can a hacker get access to the video? So those robots have been, future generations of those robots are built without cameras. Literally, there's no hardware. It's LiDAR and laser and those kinds of technology, so that you can't even capture that type of data. And secondly, yes, for companies like us, we're the ones monitoring and coordinating the activities of the robot. So the robot is whitelisted to only communicate with our platform. We have a partnership with Microsoft. We host in Azure, so there's very tight control around where the data can actually be sent out and communicate, which alleviates some of those concerns. But obviously, if you look at the US military banning DJI use in some of those applications, those are going to just continuously be concerns.
Yeah. Oh, that's fascinating. And just lastly, if we've got listeners that are wanting to maybe get a bit of hands-on time with some robotics, and they're wondering where to get started, what's your recommendation on that front?
Yeah, and we spoke about this the other day, and the first thing I said is really go and do the research on building your own robot. And I recommend a drone as a really great fun project to build. For $100 you can get all the components you possibly need off AliExpress or one of these, and have them delivered in a couple of weeks and get to it in a summer holiday with your kids or etc. The only downside of it is that research is hard. You actually need to trawl geek websites looking for tutorials on what components you need. You need to learn about voltage, you need to learn about control systems, and I think it's a great example of where the robotics industry at. It is very hard, and in the robotics software industry, the robotics teams always say that everything is hard, and we've just seen everything we do is the same. So go ahead and do that. The easy option is go buy one of the new Lego Mindstorm kits, but it's very much a filtered down experience of what real robotics is about.
Yeah. Oh, well, that's fascinating. It's been fantastic to chat, David.
Yeah.
Now I want to give a huge show of appreciation to our show partners, Sumo Logic, Vodafone, Spark, Vocus, HP, Samsung, Gorilla Technology, and of course our headline partner Umbrella Connect, who if you look on their website, they're pulling together more content on the tech front every day. So it's interesting to really see that platform get kicked off here in New Zealand. So thanks everybody for listening in, and thanks David for coming on the show.
Thanks for having me.
Where do people track you down if they want to get a bit more information? Is your website the best place?
On our website, Rocos.io is up and running, and feel free to reach out on LinkedIn if anyone wants to talk to me personally.
Excellent, that's great. Thanks, David.
Thanks a lot.
Thanks, everyone. Catch you next week. See ya.
New Zealand's Tech Podcast, the voice of the tech community, proudly supported by Umbrella Connect.